In 2017, Maori tribes living alongside the Wanganui River in New Zealand successfully fought for it to be given the same rights in law as a human being. They considered the river to be a living being, and intrinsic to their being, the great river flows from the mountains to the sea. I am the river is me. To us in the UK, it's inconceivable to think of as a river as having the same rights as a human being, and to feel so connected to it that we would want to afford it the same level of protection as we would a person. I Am on My Way to the Sea is a collection of visual and audio pieces inspired by this river journey, the relationship I formed with it, its essence as a moving, living thing, and how I came to understand our wider relationship with it as a society, how we have managed its flow through weirs and walls, limited our own access to it, covered it over with concrete, and use it for the disposal of our waste. This summer I walked down the River Colne, from its source above Marsden, downstream to Colne Bridge, which is as close as I could get to where it joins the larger River Calder. I tried to stay as close to the river as I could, and for much of the time this was possible, especially in the upper stretches. Sometimes there were official footpaths, other times it was a case of scrambling along the bankside, and occasionally I ventured into the water, becoming more and more inclined to do so as my journey continued. My first trip out is to find out where the River Colne starts. I meet with an old colleague, Dave, who works protecting the local rivers. We take a walk up to the moors. We agree the Colne doesn't have a single source, not like a spring popping out of a hillside, but instead is the convergence of two small tributaries, Redbrook and Hay Clough, each in turn with their own tributaries that funnel steeply down through the Pennine moorland and join to form the start of the Colne a little way above Marsden. I film some black river flies. There are hundreds of thousands of them skitting and dancing over the water's surface and lined up on the stems of the bankside grass. In Hay Green it is a lovely day. More flies skitting, the water all glints and sparkles and ripples and swirling foam. Grass seed heads lightly nodding in the breeze. A group of mallards strutting and quacking with their little brown ducklings, the same colour as river stones. Some pale pink sheets billowing on the washing line of a nearby row of cottages. You get the picture. A man comes out to tell me I am on private land. He's not angry with me, but he does want me to know that I am on private land. I think to myself, oh no, is this what it's going to be like? People deciding to tell me off, advise me, move me on from their bit of the river. I decide to be very polite and try to strike up a friendly conversation. I tell him I'm a sound artist doing a project on people's relationship with the river, in the hope this prevents any escalation of things, or perhaps distracts him from my trespass. Just a bit above me in the river, altitude-wise, is the Huddersfield Narrow Canal. And often I spend a day walking down the riverbank as close as I can, and then scramble up and walk quickly back along the canal later in the day, at the end of the day, to get back to where I park my car. And it's flat and accessible and well managed, and there's signposts, joggers and dog walkers. And the water's silent and murky. And up at the top especially, there are some very manicured gardens along the banks. But down over the canal towpath wall, only a matter of metres away, there's a much more wild place. Here is the river, it's green, everything's green. I scrambled through vegetation to get here, and I feel like I've found a secret spot. Although there are some drink cans, so I know I'm not the only one who's been here. But this river experience is a bit like being a child again. It's giving me that sense of adventure I used to get exploring outside by myself as a kid. It's becoming clear to me that people like to be by the river. In many places, whilst there are no official footpaths, there are unofficial tracks through the Himalayan balsam and mud, through little gaps between barbed wire fences and walls, down slippery slopes. So people, some people anyway, the sure of foot and the explorers, are connected to the river as a place to be, possibly in groups, possibly alone. And I begin to understand that the riverbank is a liminal space. And I talked to my partner about this and the experience that I'm having being in this liminal space. And she finds this paper from a journal called Landscape Research called Ambivalent Landscapes, Wilderness in the Urban Interstices. And the authors, Anna Jorgensen and Marion Tilecoat, write about these post-modern wilderness spaces that may be found in urban interstices, in woodland, abandoned allotments, river corridors, derelict or brownfield sites, and especially in areas in which spontaneous growth of vegetation through natural succession suggests nature's in control. Interstitial wilderness landscapes present an opportunity to try out numerous other identities and ways of being, unmediated by the physical, social and cultural demands that adhere to most other urban areas. What I come to understand as I'm spending more and more time in this space is that because it hasn't been given a designated use by humans, it's not home space, it's not work space, it's not recreational space as in a park or a shopping mall. It's a space which has had no particular use defined for it. Then that is changing my own headspace, and it's making me feel like I'm quite free and I can do what I want. And I come to recognise that that's quite a special feeling these days. That it's not easy to find places where you can have that kind of headspace. I start off my river journey thinking that I mustn't get my feet wet, I mustn't fall in. But then one day I think to myself, why is it that I think I mustn't get my feet wet? Why have I come to a point where I need to protect myself from the river? Of course I can get in the river if I want. So I start getting in the river, especially when I want to see something on the other side, and it's the quickest way to get there. So I want to follow the river round this bend. but there's no footpath, and I think I'm definitely already trespassing. But I can see on the map there is this footpath on the corner a little further up on the other side of the river, and I decide I'm going to aim for that. So I take my boots off and I cross the river. But when I get to the other side, the vegetation's too dense and too brambly to go anywhere. So all I can do at that point is recross the river back to where I started. And I think this land probably belongs to the adjacent chemical plant. And I wonder if they've got surveillance cameras. But anyway, I walk along the bank, following the river downstream, round the corner, until I get to this road bridge, this small bridge that crosses over into the chemical plant. But what I find is I can't get out of the river on my side. I'm kind of blocked by a security fence, and there's no easy way up onto the bridge. It's too high above me. And so I wonder about going across the river in bare feet again, but here it's a bit deeper and you can't see the bottom. And memories come back to me when I was young, and I slashed my foot in a river. I stood on something sharp whilst I was chasing after a friend's shoe, because another kid had thrown her shoe into the river. So I decide I'll have to put my boots on and wade across in them, and so that's what I do. And I get to the other side, and my shoes and my socks and my trousers are soaked, but I manage to get scrabble up the bank and get back onto dry land. And then I discover that I've come out by something called the Bat Tower, and that's some consolation, because I've been wondering where the Bat Tower is, and I'm pleased that I found it. I stop in Longroyd in some woods to drink some tea, and I have a chat with a guy who sat by the river drinking beer. We complain about the litter. He says he always takes his litter home, and he opens up his rucksack to show me all his empty beer cans. He says he hasn't been out of his house for a while, and even though he's lived in Longroyd all his life, which is over 30 years, he's amazed he's only just found out about this spot from some of the people he knows up by Aldi in Milnesbridge. It seems for him the river is a place of solace. I've taken to looking under concrete bridges for graffiti, and there is always some to see. The Colne has suffered several really serious pollution incidents in recent decades. In May 2010, a large fire at a chemical plant called Grosvenor Chemicals resulted in the discharge of polluted firewater to the river, and that had devastating impacts on the invertebrates and the fish. And one of the chemicals released was a synthetic pyrethroid called cypermethrin, and it's really toxic to aquatic life and kills insects when present in the water at concentrations much less than 1 part per billion, or like 1 microgram per litre. And in the UK we've set standards for cypermethrin concentrations in fresh water so that we can protect aquatic life. And these are really, really, really tiny concentrations reflecting the extreme toxicity of cypermethrin, and they mustn't be breached. So the annual average concentration limit for cypermethrin is 0.00008 micrograms per litre. So that's kind of thousandths of parts per billion. And the maximum concentration is 0.0006 micrograms per litre. And on the occasion of the pollution incident, the levels in the river went up to 0.69 micrograms per litre. So 1,000 times higher than the maximum allowable concentration. So that's why there was so much ecological damage caused by that fire. So subsequent to the pollution incident, about a year later, the Environment Agency restocked the river with 5,000 4-month-old grayling fish to aid its recovery. But you might well ask, why are we using such toxic chemicals? And cypermethrin was invented in 1974 as an insecticide, and it's used in quite large quantities in agriculture, so 24,000 kilograms a year were used in 2016 on pests such as aphids and caterpillars. It's used in forestry to control pine weevils. It's used in veterinary medicines to treat lice and ticks and flies. And it's used in wood preservatives, so it's widely in use today. But if you are a gardener, you can use it. You can buy it to kill insects in your garden. You might, however, decide that you don't want to use such a toxic chemical, one that will undoubtedly kill the pest that you're trying to remove from your garden plants, but it will probably kill every other insect that comes into contact with it as well. I'm beginning to see the river as a dynamic, moving, living thing and home to many creatures, but also a thing that's been heavily managed and mistreated by humans over the decades. But because it's constantly flowing, it's hard not to feel like it has a life force. It'll just keep going, no matter what humans impose on it. On the rock is a fledgling grey wagtail. I don't go any closer because its parents are anxious about my presence and making lots of noise. This is the bird species I most often see on the river, all the way up and down its length. And even though it's called a grey wagtail, it has a bright yellow underside, and for me that's its most striking feature, along with its wagging tail. Most of the time on my solo journey down the river, I've not felt in any personal danger, but occasionally I have come across a path and wondered if I should go down it. I think part of the tension of these liminal spaces is to do with the potential danger or the risk associated with being in them. It is potentially risky, but that also makes it somewhat exciting. It's summer and the river levels are low, and I'm on the riverbank in Newsom, Huddersfield, and I'm watching this piece of plastic that would have been swept down the river when the water levels were higher, and it's now caught high up on a tree and it's wafting very gently in the slight breeze. And it looks like it's been wrapped around this tree branch for a long time. It's slowly degrading and it's got a kind of translucent, delicate, ephemeral quality. And the tree and the river and the elements have turned it into something quite sculptural. And I look at it and I see that it might in fact look perfectly legitimate in an art gallery. It is kind of arty. So later in September I go back to an upstream, cleaner part of the river with bin bags and waders and a pair of rubber gloves to forage for river art. And the items on the wall of the exhibition and hanging from the ceiling are examples. And I think it's debatable whether I'm the artist. I mean, I've made certain choices over what rubbish to take from the river, and I've chosen things I like the look of, so like twisty, frayed, organic, messed up things, and I've chosen how to place them in the exhibition space. But it strikes me that all I've really done is appropriate the objects. Whilst walking the river's length, I became a bit obsessed with the amount of litter and debris, and I started to take photos on my phone camera as if I was doing a litter survey. And I invited other people to send me their photos too, so they could all be collated into a collage, kind of a snapshot of the situation from the top to the bottom of the river. They represent just a small percentage of the litter in the river this summer, and it's an ever-changing situation with a kind of constant topping up of new litter from people's excursions to the riverbank, and a continual movement of material downstream, especially when it rains heavily. Unless, of course, the material becomes too stuck in the vegetation or embedded in the sediment. So I've come to the end of my journey, and the most downstream location I can get to is near a road bridge called Colne Bridge, and there's no official path to the river down here, but you can scramble down the bankside, and it's riffly and alive again. A little bit further upstream it's quite silent and still, but this stretch by Colne Bridge is really lively. And I come back with my partner to record some sounds and some video, and amazingly, the afternoon that we're there's a family of kingfishers flying up and down the stretch, so we sit and watch about 4 kingfishers. There's also a fly fisherman who says it's a great spot for trout and grayling, and it's not owned by an angling club, so it's free to fish at this point in the river. So somewhat paradoxically, but also encouragingly, right at the bottom of the river, before it joins the Calder, after it's received a lot of what you might call upstream abuse. The river's full of wildlife and feels very alive. And I think one of the conclusions that I come to about the River Colne and our relationship with it is that it is quite paradoxical. Clearly lots of signs that people love the river and really value it as somewhere to go for recreation or relaxation or solitude or solace. It's an important space. But at the same time, our relationship with the river has many less positive aspects, in that we've engineered it a lot to constrain it or cover it over. We leave an awful lot of litter behind, and we use it to dispose of our waste.